Sage Rosenfels, Brent Blum. Heard and viewed exclusively across the world. Only on Iowa Everywhere.
And we welcome you to the Tuesday, October 18th edition of the Rose and Bloom podcast on the Iowa Everywhere Podcast Network. Of course, as always, brought to you by our friends at Circa Sports Iowa. I am Brent Bloom, back at it. I missed the Ricky Williams interview, Sage Rosenfels, but where are you today, my friend?
I'm in Austin, Texas. Came down here for a couple of things this week, and of course, Iowa State played at UT. Really good ball game. We'll get to that in a second. And just by happenstance, same weekend, Austin City Limits Music Festival, same weekend. So Friday night, went to that, went to the Iowa State game at 11 a.m., came home, took a shower, took a nap for about an hour, put on my shoes, went back to ACL on Saturday, and then Sunday had a little brunch and then hit ACL more in the evening. Chili peppers were my sort of favorite. Well, chili peppers, Billy Strings, were some of my favorites of the weekend. Not big into the Chicks, what used to be the Dixie Chicks. They were Friday night headliner. Pink was
nice.
The Saturday night headliner. Okay. But Austin City Limits Festival is simply incredible. 250,000 people in Zilker Park. It's just this giant green space, and I think there's 7 stages. I'm not sure how many bands there are, probably near 100 bands over the course of 3 days. So really an action-packed weekend, which left me extremely tired on Monday.
Is Flea of the Red Hot Chili Pepper still getting naked on stage?
He didn't get naked, but I think he had his shirt off. It was Flea's birthday, so they sang him happy birthday, yeah, sure. and that was sort of the deal. It's amazing, those guys. I don't know how old they are. I'm 44 years old.
He's 60.
They're 60. Flea came for the what's it called when they come out they leave at the end and they come back, the encore.
The encore, yeah.
Flea comes out for the encore, handstand walking across the stage back to his bass guitar. I mean, at 60 years old, he was wailing out there. So that was a great show. That was really fun to be at. My brother saw the Chili Peppers at like Woodstock 99 or.
Well, I saw a documentary on it. It's incredible.
Yeah. I think my brother was at one of those. I'm not sure if it was that one or the one in like 95 or whatever, 4 or something. So I'm not sure which. I think it was 94 my brother went to. And I think on that one they came out completely naked with giant like light bulbs over their heads or something like that. Yeah. So, or maybe they had like a sock over their private parts or something.
Well, I'm glad Flea kept his pants on for you. So that's great.
He did. What didn't keep my pants on was the Iowa State loss at the end. Great game. The Iowa State goes up 7-0, has a chance to go up 14-0. Hunter throws an interception. He just didn't see a guy coming from the other side, and I don't know if he stared down his receiver a little bit too long. It looks like he had Hutchinson on the outside for sort of a double slant, double post sort of combination. But a really, really hard fought ball game, close ball game. Defense played well. Offense did a lot of really good things. And by the way, I think Hunter Decker's a stud. I think he's an absolute stud.
Okay.
I know.
Why do you say that?
Because he can make some really, really hard throws, and he's not always accurate, but he's pretty dang accurate. He's a really good athlete, and I love the way this kid competes. I mean, they start off that game with 2 3-and-outs to start the game. Hunter takes 3 big hits in those 6 plays. All right. I mean, I think the first couple of plays were sprint outs, and maybe he had a quarterback run, sprint outs to where no one was open, and then he runs. But he is extremely tough. I love the way he plays, and he's got a strong arm, but he's got a really, really quick release. But really, I just love the way he competes. He obviously played probably his best game as a Cyclone in that
no
win.
Question.
It's really unfortunate at the end of that football game how it turned out. He ends up quarterback running and trying to get all the yards he can, and of course we all started the obvious helmet to helmet hit. It doesn't even have to be a helmet, by the way. It can be forearm, it can be shoulder pad, anything to the helmet supposedly is targeting. That doesn't even get called. I'm not sure how much the the replays were showing if it was a fumble or not. Obviously, they didn't overturn it. It was sort of hard to see, but really unfortunate because that would have been really super sweet for the Cyclones to come down and get their first win in the Big 12 this year. Obviously, it's been a tough year in conference, but this team's got a lot of fight in them. They've got a lot of talent, and they've got a lot to be hopeful for the second half of the season. I said you got the number one defense in the conference. The offense is starting to click with this new quarterback. And I thought the offensive line played tremendously against that Texas defensive line. You see those Texas guys, they look like a bunch of pro ball players over there. And the way the Iowa State offensive line kept Hunter pretty clean for most of that game, I was really impressed by those two guys. And, despite the fact that Texas has all this money, their NIL getting guys from here and there and 5-star and 4-star recruits, that game came right down to the wire against our Cyclones. And, proud of those guys, proud of the way they competed. It's just too bad it ended up the way it did at the end.
No question. So as a quarterback, I wanted to ask you this. Xavier Hutchinson drops potentially a would-be, potentially a game-winning touchdown. Texas would have still had 2 minutes left to go back the other way. What do you do as a quarterback in that situation? Because I noticed, and I thought it was really cool, Deckers went right up to him after that drive and said, hey, man, it's not on you. Like, that's, keep at it. Because Hutchinson's been unbelievable this year, but yet has still had a couple of critical drops.
Well, a couple of things. One, he sort of just popped open. And for the fact that Hunter could find him sort of late in the play and throw a good ball. And I was on the field for the game.
Okay.
It was breezy in that stadium, and that ball wasn't a perfectly thrown spiral. And so it was sort of drifting up there. And, anyone that's been in a big football stadium, it's not like playing in your backyard. There's sort of swirling winds, and that ball was definitely swirling. And when you're running as fast as you can and the ball is sort of moving on you, it's not just a linear straight line. There's that movement. And I think Hutchinson just sort of like lost his balance a little bit. He was sort of trying to turn to catch it. And sometimes you just drop him. It's sort of the way it goes. And yeah, as a quarterback, you just keep throwing to the guy. I mean, he's the best offensive player in the team. And, obviously they try to get him the ball a lot. He's extremely consistent. He does a lot of things really well. And you don't have another Xavier Hutchinson back there. So you just keep fighting, keep throwing to him. And Hutchinson makes a lot of great plays for this football team. He's going to make a lot more the second half of the season.
Well, it never surprises me, Sage. Your contact list in your cell phone. You texted me yesterday, like, hey, do you want to have Pete Thamel on? I'm like, Pete Thamel? Yeah. Like, yeah, I know Pete Thamel. Let's have him on. And so
here we are.
How do you know Pete Thamel? Let's talk to Pete Thamel.
Yeah. So a lot of times I try to have a good 5 or 6 days of trying to figure out who I want to have on the podcast. And this week, I think it's because it was, Iowa State, ACL. I just hadn't really thought about who, and we're fine doing it ourselves. But after that week of college football, I sort of went through my contacts and Pete is the perfect guy to have on because we're mid-season. There's so many questions, of course, about what's going on in college football, but also what's the future of college football? What's the future of college athletics? And where does Iowa State and the Big 12 fit into this whole thing? So really looking forward to Pete's conversation. And, I think he's going to be a great guest.
Well, let's get to it. Here is Pete Thamel.
With us today. Pete, welcome on. Pete, longtime college football, college basketball reporter, currently working with ESPN. I'm going to go ahead and allow Pete to sort of give us his rundown. He goes back from Syracuse and on his way. What have you been doing for the last 20 some years, Pete? You graduated college in '99, but give us your story really quickly.
I'm the only Syracuse graduate to work at ESPN, so there's a lot of pressure. I feel like I have to open it up for the next generation. So, I was the sports editor of the vaunted Daily Orange for a few years there during the Donovan McNabb era in the late '90s at Syracuse, back when you were slinging the pill for the Cyclone Stage. And
Donovan McNabb and Rob Conrad. Let's not forget about Rob Conrad.
I believe Rob Conrad's getting inducted into the Syracuse Hall of Fame next weekend when they host Notre Dame. So there's a lot of late '90s vibes throwing through the old text chains on my on my phone. Rob Conrad's a very good player. He was a parade All-American recruit back when that was a thing out of Massachusetts. He was one of the bigger recruits that they've had up there, and he's the last player to wear number 44, the vaunted number that Jim Brown and many others wore to a lot of acclaim. Also, in other sports too, Derek Coleman wore in basketball. So, and there was a really good bar on campus called 44s.
That's correct.
That was eventually named Conrad's for a brief period of time. So that may be Rob Conrad's biggest legacy at Syracuse.
Well, and one of his
6-year stretch where everybody could get blacked out at a bar named after him. So.
A couple great accomplishments by Rob Conrad. He and I were teammates with the Dolphins. That's not an accomplishment, but he blocked for Ricky Williams, and Ricky ran for about 1850 in 2002. We had Ricky Williams on the podcast last week. If you want to know and have an interesting conversation, go back and listen to that one. Not your classic sports podcast. But Rob fell out of a boat. He was a big fisherman, and he fell out of a boat about 5 years ago, probably. Yeah. He was off the coast of Fort Lauderdale, fell out of his boat 9 miles offshore.
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
And in the middle of the night, he was night fishing, and it was like slowly trolling east, and a wave came or something, and he fell out, and his boat just kept going. I think it ended up in like the Bahamas or something. He swam west to the shore. He traveled a total of 27 miles.
Seriously?
27 miles. Yeah. The currents naturally sort of brought him in, I think. But yeah, he swam overnight. I'm not sure how many hours it was. Ended up on, 15 miles north of where he fell out, but a total of 27 miles. And I actually had breakfast with him about 2 years later, probably right before the pandemic. And, we talked about all sorts of things. He's like a financial advisor. He's been very, very successful, really, really smart guy. When he was playing football, he couldn't wait to be done with football and to get into the world of finance and investing. He would talk about it all the time. And I think he was much happier in college football than pro football. Great guy, because he got to be more of a running back. In pro football, it was like, hey, you're going to be a wrecking ball. He didn't really like being a wrecking ball. It was not his cup of tea. It was Dave Wanstead, fullback on linebacker, let's go. And like his body just sort of fell apart. So anyway, you covered Don McNabb, Rob Conrad, Jim Boeheim at Syracuse.
Yeah, he's still there.
He's still there,
and he still has kids.
His kids are out now.
They're finally out. Okay. Good.
When I was the beat writer, they were born. He got remarried when I was in school, and when I was the beat writer, maybe it was even a little after that. The twins were the twin boys were born, and were they twin boys? There's two boys.
Close enough.
There were some twins. There was a girl involved. Anyway, they were very small, and now they've cycled through. So yes, Syracuse is one of those places, like a lot of college towns, that's sometimes like frozen in time. Like you go back 20 years later, and it's like there's Fagan's Pub, there's Jim Boeheim on the sideline.
He looks the same.
It's like, yes, there's 7 feet of snow on the sidewalk, and we're walking around like rats in a maze.
And there's a bunch of eager journalism students who, because there is a history at Syracuse, probably the number one sort of sports journalism school in America.
It would certainly fancy itself as that. There are certainly other very good schools. I'm not going to be an obnoxious Syracuse grad and just disregard the other fine institutions like Missouri and Northwestern.
Yeah, Northwestern's into it. I know Rich Eisen would probably say Michigan, but we know it's not. Michigan can't beat the best at everything. So Syracuse, and then you work for.
Oh, sorry. So I worked at the local paper, the Syracuse Post-Standard. I left in 2002. I was a basketball beat writer there. And then I went on a little odyssey through the Midwest, started freelancing, got hired by ESPN in 2003 to cover college basketball. 6 weeks later, the New York Times hired me to cover national college football and basketball. I left. It was ESPN magazine at the time. So I left, went to the New York Times, spent basically 10 years there. And my nickname at ESPN until they hired me back 20 years later was 6 Week Pete, because of my quick stint there. So so this is my 19th year, I think, as a national college football basketball reporter. Been totally blessed, seen a lot of things, seen things come, go, come back again. I think I've been to every Power 5 campus but Washington State. So it's been a privilege to be able to see America this way. As Sage can tell you, I love what I do. I love diving in the weeds. I love the action, the just it's the thing about college football that makes it great is that it's just every day is total and complete chaos. And it was like that before the transfer portal. It was like that before NIL. It is just this beautiful mess 8 months a year. And then 4 months a year, it's just like Saturday was spectacular. For people who don't like college football, I challenge you to like sit on the couch on Saturday and watch all those games with all those endings. It was just I'm standing on the sideline in Knoxville with the TCU game up on my phone in the hand, and like literally like in timeout.
Incredible.
Like, yeah. And you can go on and on. I just feeding my son this morning on the couch. I just watched the Syracuse NC State game because it happened to be on the ACC network, and that was a pretty good football game. The final didn't end, but like it's just like there's just this boundless, endless entertainment. And I think the thing that Sage can probably relate to more than anything as he travels around doing that NFL stuff is like college football is a window into America, right? I'm going to be in Eugene on Saturday. I was in Knoxville last week. We were in Boone for the show. You're in Miami. You're in Columbus. You're in Austin. You're also in Ames and in Stillwater. And it's just constantly you roll out of the airport and just a completely different part of the world, completely different culture. Obviously very different academic institutions. From Stanford to fill in the low bar blank that I don't want to end up on someone's blog because I used it as the low bar. But there's just this just wide swath. And for me doing it as long as I have, I think that's one of the things that keeps it totally interesting is just every year is different. Now, it could, people say, oh, it's the same three teams, but it's real. And that's if you're a very casual fan who's
sure
at the end. But from the big picture, and then you throw college basketball in, and you've got Murray State, you've got Gonzaga, and you've got it's like a window into a totally different, like a Providence College.
Butler.
Yes, but exactly. So it's just, it's complete chaos every day in a way that's really energizing. Like there's no cliche about jobs. Like, you never have the same day. Like my days, like I haven't even ever been close to being the same.
So is that why you stayed in college sports and not moved up to the NFL or to professional sports? Is just the wide variety, the 120, major college football teams, and just and the NFL is just a different business, and you enjoy the collegiate experience, enjoy the 18 to 22-year-olds in the small towns versus the New York Giants versus the Los Angeles Rams. Is that why you stayed in college football? College sports?
Yes. I enjoy the ascent, the who's next, the evaluation and development of that's a fun age range, right? It's a fun age range to be around. You're on a campus, these guys, like every week you drop in and these guys are right in the prime of what they're doing. Look at like Hendon Hooker at Tennessee last week. You go through it all. And I'm the son of a high school principal, so I've always sort of college always had like a little different allure to me because I think growing up through an educational prism, and it's been a blast to see like we could go through it all day, but like I met Russell Wilson when he transferred to Wisconsin. Mm-hmm. I knew spent a day with Andrew Luck on campus at Stanford. And I'm not saying this to like name drop or anything, but it's been what I enjoy is like watching film with Tim Tebow in the Florida football offices one Tuesday night before they played Georgia. Like just getting to know these guys and getting a little peek behind before they become guys. But there's also guys who don't become guys too, who are just great college players. And I think the NFL establishment views that as he was he was a great player at the level where he was. It just didn't translate. And those are for a variety of reasons. But I always get a little irked when like people take away someone's collegiate greatness because it doesn't translate to what's really almost a different sport at this point, what they're doing in the NFL. Now some of that's come back because of scheme changes and everything. So to answer your question, I don't watch much NFL. Now, part of it is because I work or travel on Sundays, and I live in Boston, as you can see from my Red Sox hat here. So I certainly follow the Patriots, right? Like my mom watches the Patriots every Sunday. So I'd like to see Bailey Zapp go win a game, but it just the passion is completely different. And the chaos is completely different. And college, I think it's much more interesting. It's much more layered, but it's really much more varied. And I think that's the coolest part for me is that it's, 1 week you're writing about, UTEP, right? And then the next week you're writing about an HBCU, and then the next week you're writing about Michigan. Like it's just all completely different. At a certain point, I had some opportunities covering the NFL, but it was like I've done this for 10 years. I'm not going to go like restart in a more competitive environment. Like
those relationships and trying to get the coaches to give the inside scoop, which they don't want to do, but in college they've been feeding you it for 10 years, and you've built up all those. I'm sure it would be much harder to start over at this point, and you're sort of at the top or near the top of the college football world. And I imagine sort of staying in, you're great at what you do, and then to go change it and sort of throw all that away would be challenging. By the way, we didn't do what we normally do. We start off this podcast usually of how the heck do you know Sage Rosenfels? Because I'm the one bringing on the guests here. And so how did we meet, Mr. Thamel?
Sage, we met through the Quarterback Collective Camp, which I was covering while I worked for Yahoo Sports. And we met in Southern California, and soon after Sage and I met, we went to dinner, and it's been a long blossoming friendship.
Can I tell you a quick story of when we met? By the way, so we do this Quarterback Collective Camp. It's in like the Valley in California, Westlake High School, and the night before we're going to have this like sort of coaches meeting, and my man Richmond is sort of in charge of this thing. It's his little business. He's a coach's agent, and we have this very unproductive coaches meeting for about 45 minutes as we sit there and listen to Richmond just ramble about anything. And it was Pete and I and like maybe two other coaches, and Mike McDaniel at the time was just like, I don't even know what his job was in 2017. And then it's like the meeting ends at 9:00. I've just flown in. We haven't had anything to eat. We go to a yard house or something like that and grab dinner. And
solid choice.
I was probably complaining about something. I'm sure Pete remembers what I was complaining about. But anyway, we had like this 9 to 10 o'clock dinner, and the next day, of course, cover that QB Collective situation, which was interesting because you go back to those years now, and it was like Bryce Young, Caleb Williams, Justin Fields. That was the first time I met him. DJ. I'm not going to.
Uiagalelei.
Yeah.
DJU.
So
DJ's dad was there too, who's one of the bigger humans I've ever seen.
Yes. Yeah.
Big Dave.
And when I just saw,
a giant human.
I was at the Iowa State Texas game this weekend, and after the game was on the field, and ran to Malik Murphy, who was he's probably the third string quarterback at Texas right now. Yeah. But at the time he was like 14 and he was 6'6", 230. And I'm like, they don't make them like they used to make them. I mean, I thought the kid was a senior in high school and he was like a ninth grader.
Yeah, he's a great kid too.
Great kid.
Yeah.
So if Quinn Ewers decides to go get paid more money to go somewhere else, they have another.
Well, they got Arch coming though.
Yeah, and they got Arch coming
Malik.
Too. Yeah. So that's a whole other. That's an interesting situation. University of Texas quarterbacking, because Malik's a sort of a 4 or 5 star kid. You got Arch coming in, and then of course Quinn Ewers is one of the top recruits over the last couple years. Where do you see college football going? Let's just talk about college football since we're in the football season. Where do you see it going? I mean, there's the 5 conferences. The SEC's building this giant conference. The Big Ten seems to be wanting to build a sort of a giant conference. The Pac-12, the Big 12, and the ACC seem to be the other 3 of like, what do you think is going to happen in the next 5 to 10 years?
It's a great question. So I think the one distinct shift we've seen, Sage, is that there's a power 2 right now. The finances have dictated that the Big Ten and the SEC have and will be pulled away for a significant period of time from the other handful of sports. And then you have 3 leagues that are scrambling to catch up. And one, the ACC has this very long television deal that gave them their ESPN contract, their cable channel, which I just watched this morning, the old ACC network. And it was a very good deal at the time that has become outdated quickly. And that has become a bit of an anchor for the ACC. So then you have the Big 12 and the Pac-12, who are both on the cusp of deals in the next couple of years. And they're almost like dueling for the same smaller pool of money. And so those 3 leagues, where the Big 12 and the Pac-12 end up, will be a little bit of a bellwether for where those leagues can go. There's a prevailing thought that I don't necessarily know if I hold, but there's a prevailing thought that like if one league jumps ahead of another financially distinctly, that they may be able to cannibalize the other one.
Well, Pete, with that said, it's kind of like the football season started and realignment stopped, but it clearly hasn't stopped. So there's got to be stuff happening specifically with the Big 12 and the Pac-12 behind the scenes, which we're hopefully, as a Big 12 guy, that the Big 12 will actually turn out in front of that race.
Well, I think if you're, there's obviously a lot of Iowa State fans and Iowa people listening to this podcast, and the fate of Big 12, really reverberates through every corner of your state. It's a big economic engine. It's a value to have the Big 12 planted in Ames where it is. And right now, if you listen to Brett Yormark, the commissioner's comments, he kind of went on a media blitz and a barnstorming tour in New York. He has been very intentional and he has been very strategic about pushing that conference forward. Brett Yormark is a little bit like a character from Billions. I don't know if you guys watch Billions on Showtime. He's like a no-nonsense hedge fund guy in this world of like bowl officials and kind of like, old guard muckety-mucks. And again, Bob Bolster is a very good commissioner. I don't think his name should be besmirched at all. But at the end of the day, like, you need a new car and you get a new car and all of a sudden you're like, oh, there's some new fancy toys here. And the Big 12, I think, is discovering some new features. It went from like a steady old Wagoneer to a Tesla right now. And I think there's just some things that can be maximized. And he is being as aggressive as humanly possible. It's interesting doing this as long as I have now to see some of these new commissioners come in and how they act. Because there's sort of this like understood decorum. It's almost like the unwritten rules in baseball or whatever. And it has been delightful to see Brett Yormark just like completely blow through all the stop signs and say exactly what's on his mind. And I do think he has been as aggressive as possible, getting ESPN and Fox to agree to open up that deal. There's been progress from what he said through various media reports. I really think that there should be a sign of optimism for where the Big 12 is going. He has given the league an adrenaline jolt. The league itself has really helped itself. The two teams leaving have totally tanked like the worst in a generation, right? You have Kansas balling like Mangino's back on the sideline. You got Lance Leipold is this unbelievable innovator. That offense, Sage, I'm sure you could talk about it. It's been a blast to watch. Like, Kansas football is fun. Like, that is like one of the great magic acts of all time, right?
Crazy.
And so it's been a blast league for the year. Oklahoma State's very good. TCU is in the thick of the national title race. I think we can say that with some safety right now. And maybe more importantly, with Oklahoma and Texas gone, you need like in that region, in that Southwest region, you need a thumper, right? And it was Baylor last year, and now TCU has emerged as that thumper this year. I think Baylor's very good. They lost a couple close games, but boy, like, in the state, in that footprint, the Big 12 needs to be robust. Like, Kansas State is doing great. That helps. But the Big 12 needs to be great in Texas. And this TCU run and the way they played, and they are fun to watch. Quentin Johnston, I think, will be one of the first 3 receivers picked in the draft. He hasn't been super productive this year. Have you seen him at all, Sage?
I have not, but another
he's a monster.
Max Dugan is from Council Bluffs, Iowa.
Oh, okay. Well, we are an Iowa podcast. So
that's right.
Yeah. So I just want to add that. It always comes back to Iowa. Do you see the Big 12 trying to expand with the 2 Arizona schools? I mean, as you know, a lot of Midwesterners go to Arizona or Naples in the wintertime, right? And Arizona just seems to be this natural. I mean, I get a direct flight from Omaha to Phoenix. Arizona and Arizona State, Colorado, Utah, more than the true Pac-12 schools of Oregon and Washington and Stanford. Do you feel like Iowa or the Big 12 can snag some of those schools away from the Pac-12 and sort of the Pac-12 then falls apart at that point? Or how do you see it playing out?
I guess the 2 things I say there, Sage, would be follow the money, right? Yeah. Like, they're not going to go because of direct flights. They're not going to go because of an academic consortium. They're going to go because there's more money, right?
We're an academic fit, therefore. Yeah.
Yes. The other thing to follow, which I think is important, is, and this is changing. It's literally changing one Thursday at a time. Although recent Thursdays haven't helped with the way the NFL games have unfolded. But where do you feel like your schools will get the best exposure? Now, look, LA was the heartbeat of the Pac-12, and that heart got transplanted. So if you are an Arizona and you are a Colorado and you are a Utah, which has BYU as a natural rivalry, you have to sit back institutionally and say, okay, without Southern California, where does it value us to be more? Does it value us to be in Texas more? And does it value, do we value the mountain time zone and then this Midwestern footprint, or do we value the West Coast? That's like not a decision that the AD and the football coach make. That's like the president with the board and admissions. And, if these games do go on Amazon Prime, they will not get the rating they would get on linear television, right?
Sure.
They just are not going to. And I'm not a TV expert, and there's consultants that can break those numbers, but that's pretty simple. There's plenty of people that stream. Streaming is the future. I'm not some like guy standing on his lawn waving at the cloud, but they're still like, yeah, call my parents to try to explain to them how to work YouTube TV, and you can see some of the ratings just aren't going to be there, right? Yeah. So I do think like those are all variables. These decisions, like, I do kind of chuckle when people are like, they'll just go grab a few schools. Hey, come on in, Arizona.
Yeah.
Hey, like it's a keg party and you buy a ticket. Like it's a little bit more complex than that. I will say this, like, having covered a lot of realignment in 20 years, an expiring grant of rights is the number one signifier. That allows free access, essentially. And the Pac-12 has an expiring grant of rights right now. Yep. And grants of rights are tricky because they bond you to, they can work, and the ACC has seen this a little bit too. They can work both as something that unifies the league, but it can also be something that divides the league, because they don't feel bonded, they feel handcuffed. Yeah. And so there's an interesting, like, if the Pac-10, as they are now, and maybe they add San Diego State and Boise or Fresno or whatever, if they grow and they go into a new TV deal, they have to sign some sort of grant of rights because they don't want to get left at the doorstep. And that's going to be a trickier step for that league because they have two schools that have more market value than anyone in the Big 12. The thing that has the Big 12 so unified right now is that we could have a half-an-hour podcast on what's the best football program in the Big 12.
Exactly.
Well, is it TCU? Is it Oklahoma State? Is it Kansas State? Like there's arguments. Well, they have good facilities, but there is no clear cut. Oklahoma State historically would be that, but they have a poor market, and it's not like this heartbeat place. So the fact that none of the Big 12 schools transcend the other, they are so noticeably different than the other. In a weird way, they've been bonded in their like upper middle class cul-de-sac. They're all sort of on the same street. Yeah. Some might have like an extra bedroom or a pool in the back, but for the most part, everyone's in the same neighborhood. And that has kept the Big 12 together.
Do you think, a school like Iowa State and a school like Oklahoma State, they're not big TV markets, right? And a lot of times in the past, like the Big Ten Network, it was like, get Rutgers, get Maryland, TV markets. It's not TV markets as much as it used to be, right? It's clicks. But I mean, Iowa State, we get 60,000 people at all of our games. All right. Yeah. As we all know, UCLA gets 20,000 people, and some of these other Pac-12 schools aren't getting 60,000. We also have a bustling basketball program that's regulated in the top, 2025 in the country with great fan support. I think from an Iowa State perspective, and I'm sure Kansas State fans would say the same thing, Oklahoma State fans say the same thing, is yes, we don't have a huge market, but we have massive fan support and passion for our teams. And how much does that carry weight as far as the future when you talk about the two mega conferences? I mean, does the Big Ten care that Iowa State gets 60,000? Does the Big Ten care that Kansas has a regularly national contending basketball team and now a good football program? Is there a chance that some of these more Big 12 schools are going to be taken away by either the SEC or the Big Ten? Like, where does Iowa State and Kansas State, some of the old Big Six schools, where do they fit into this thing? Because they do have very strong athletic programs with great fan support. Sure. They just don't have the television sets and the number of people living in those states.
Yes. So one of the eternal truisms of realignment is that basketball doesn't matter. It just are you going to switch leagues? Are you going to change the financial paradigm of a TV contract? It matters, but it doesn't really matter. Like, it doesn't matter in the sense that, like, the Big Ten is not going to take Kansas for basketball, right? That's just not going to happen. Like, it's just that has been proven time and again. There was a time when there were a bunch of schools that were thinking about going to the Big East when the Big 12 was on the brink. There's Big 12's on the brink a couple times. I give them credit. They've always figured out a way to get back. Where, like, there was talk about, like, Kansas going to the Mountain West. That was, but it's just football drives the bus. It drives the trailer behind the bus, and it drives like the little tennis ball bouncing on the back of the trailer. It drives every possible vehicle. Now, there's an old thing this is a funny story. So I remember during some realignment time, I was on Rick Pitino was the coach at Louisville. And I said to him at one point in a conversation, because he was in disbelief at a basketball school and being a basketball guy, that football could drive the bus that well. And I was like, Rick, the Belk Bowl did better ratings last year than Carolina Duke, Mm-hmm. And so that was, in October, whatever. At Big East Media Day, 3 weeks later, he's on the podium be like, well, the Belk Bowl did a better job at better rating than Carolina Duke. The world's changed. I always laugh at that because there was 10 years ago, there was this oh boy, regular season basketball doesn't rate. And postseason basketball rates fantastically, but that's all run through the NCAA and spit out to all the tiny little America Easts and everybody. Now, the big boys get a cut of that. And college basketball, from a financial perspective, if you're running it the way the Big 12 is doing it right now, it does matter. And it certainly matters on campuses, right? You go to campus like Iowa State that gets a full gym on a Tuesday, and it matters in that sense. But from a big picture, billion-dollar revenue driver standpoint, basketball is just a small tick. There was an old thing about the ACC contract. Now, basketball matters in ACC probably more than anywhere else, right? Where it's only 15% of the ACC's contract is actually basketball. So, and that's it. Just those are important things to remember as you go. So, what happens to Kansas? What happens to Iowa State? What happens to Kansas State? I think they're on the same street for a while together. That would be my guess. The passion matters and the full stadium matters. The market matters a lot less than it used to. I think if the Big Ten could do it over, they might have taken a longer look at a Kansas over a Rutgers. But at the time, Rutgers offered TV sets and they offered that 95 corridor. And there was the old world domination thought where you get Rutgers, Maryland, then you pick up Virginia, North Carolina, and then you have the whole East Coast to pair with that. Now, that has gotten that has not manifested itself yet, but that was always sort of the Jim Delaney pipe dream.
Since you always have the behind the scenes information, have you heard anything about the Big Ten or the SEC looking to, as the SEC, do they want to add Clemson or Florida State? Are you hearing anything from either the Big Ten or the SEC about possible other teams that they may snag away from either the Big 12, the ACC, or the Pac-12?
So the ACC right now is a little bit tied to the grant of rights, like I spoke to before. They are bonded together, and for BC, Syracuse, and Georgia Tech, the ACC deal is great. They couldn't go do better. For Clemson, for Florida State, and for Miami, they have a lot more market value. So there's been conversations, and we've reported that unequal revenue sharing may become a reality to try to keep them happy. But the grant of rights has certainly, the legalities and how handcuffed you are to the grant of rights has been explored in a pretty deep way in the ACC, and there's been no movement, which tells you what they figured out they can do.
How many more years is left on that ACC contract?
I believe it is through 2036.
Oh, wow. They sound like a 20-year deal or something.
Yes.
Got you.
2036.
Went for the guarantee. I did that in my NFL career. I got offered a 4-year deal, and I was like, oh, they're going to give me a couple $1 million. I'll sign that 4-year deal. I should have signed a 2 or 3-year deal, become a free agent, and got that. So they sort of stuck in a long-term deal. And do you think there's almost no way out of that until 2036? I mean, that's a long time.
The grant of rights sort of indicates that.
Got you. So like a Clemson would have to pay back $100 million or something.
So this is a good little time to do realignment 101. Grant of rights. What is it? It's a contract you have to sign, in order to have the television deal. A grant of rights means you are actually granting your rights. So NC State, to use just a hypothetical example, because I was just watching them this morning on the ACC network, when they signed that television deal, they said, okay, we are going to give the rights to all of our games to the ACC, to ESPN for that time. So from now, like those rights have already been granted. So legally, you would have to get them back, and you would have to pay it's hundreds of millions to unwind, and you're not even guaranteed to have your rights after you unwind. So it would be. I'm not saying no one will do it, but boy, like for a public school to hand-to-hand combat for a couple $100 million that would be unpleasant.
So basically, like NC State is Britney Spears, and the ACC is Britney Spears' dad, and she can't. And NC State. Wow. I mean, that's pretty much where we're at this point.
Feel free and use that one on your next Sports Center hit.
This is a mix of sports and pop culture here. Well, let's move on from the realignment talking about college football this year right now. The top 5-7 schools. Where do you see this thing slowly playing out? Obviously, the Alabama loss is huge. Josh Heupel at Tennessee, unbelievable job. By the way, 2001 draft class, Josh Heupel. I think I get a little bit more exercise than Josh, but that's fine. He's watching film and coaching guys.
Who's making more money right now, buddy?
Every other Friday, he can sneer at you.
You don't know how my investments are doing.
Right? Fair enough.
How do you see this? Last we're about halfway through the college football season. How do you see the next 6-7 weeks playing out until we get to the college the conference championship games?
Well, I think Ohio State is the best team right now, and when you go from there, it's interesting. Clemson, I'd be curious. What do you think of DJ's development? Have you watched him much this year, Sage?
I've watched him a little bit. Going back to that QB Collective camp, he was such a big guy. He was 245 pounds or something like that. And when he was a junior in high school, and he had a huge arm, he threw a ball like 80 yards or something at our camp. It was a little windy, but still. But he didn't throw a great ball, and it didn't spin a lot. And watching him throw the last couple years, it's like he's not really a natural thrower. And there's something about being a natural thrower that helps with accuracy and timing and just consistently, throwing the ball where it needs to be. And I think that's where he has struggled. That ball sort of comes out, and sometimes it dives a little bit, just doesn't spin it. But it does look like he has improved on that. His motion's a little bit different, but the ball is definitely spinning better. He's just such an athlete and such a rare mix of the ability to be that big and be able to throw. There's just only so many people. So I haven't seen him that much, but I have seen enough where I've seen that improvement from his freshman year, where he came in behind Trevor Lawrence. He's going to be the next thing. And then he wasn't the next thing right off the bat. And he didn't take college football by storm, right? You do see that improvement. I mean, he's 20 years old now, maybe 21. Mm-hmm. And he's one of those guys that just has an incredible ceiling. And, so, I mean, you would probably watch him, closer than I do. Yeah.
So again, I don't have the same quarterback acumen in terms of being able to break down motions and such. I, as a kid, because he's a delightful kid, who you've gotten to know a little bit, I'm just happy that he sort of endured struggle. There's a lot of incentive to run in college football today, right? Like actually leave. Oh, I can go back. I can transfer home. I can go here. There's opportunity there. There's plenty of places to go. And he put his head down, and he got a lot of criticism. He did not play well in his sophomore year. And it has been a non-linear experience that I think the adversity has shaped him. And I feel like he's come out on the other side and really, really played well this year. I'm not saying he's like this polished prospect who's going to soar on, but he lost a bunch of weight. They've used him in the run game more, and he has positioned Clemson. They were one of the worst offenses in college football last year. They're kind of middle of the pack-ish, getting a little better. His individual numbers are much improved in every category. And I'm happy for him that he has been able to match some of his natural ability and learn and grow and not run.
Do you see them as the team that's going to come out of the ACC when this all shakes down in the final 8? By the way, is it we're not they're not four teams. We're 4 this year.
Still 4, yeah.
But then it goes to 12. What does the future look like? This is not my forte.
We will actually learn about that some this week, Sage. Timely question.
Good work, Sage. Good work.
I was doing my research.
Right. Yeah, I can tell you're right on the pulse here, but not knowing how many teams are going to play.
This is why we have you on.
I have this deep knowledge knowing how many teams play for the championship. So right now, the College Football Playoff is a 4-team exercise. All right, that is a 12-year contract. The powers that be have agreed in the future to make this a 12-team exercise starting in 2025. The years 11 and 12 of this contract, which are, I guess that would be 24 and 25. So it'll be starting 26. Sorry. So 24 and 25, they call year 11 and year 12 of this initial college football playoff contract are right now in flux. Commissioners are meeting and having conference calls and talking about, okay, can we expand this thing to 12 early? The general sense I get is yes, that will happen. It will definitely happen in 25. It will probably happen in 24. Definitely is a strong word, but like it's more likely to happen in 25 than in 24. And those answers should come to us, if not by the end of this week, then probably by mid-November, I would say. There's a lot of like bold dates and logistics and all boring stuff that is getting in the way. But you know what's the great motivator in college athletics?
Money.
Good old-fashioned hard cash. And there is a lot of good old-fashioned hard cash at the end of this. So the old academic calendars and hotel room blocks tend to sort themselves out when there's a big old pot of money at the
I do appreciate when these schools switch conferences, that in their press release, it's, you know, the new conference fits our both academic and athletic endeavors, and we all know it's simply about the cash, 100%.
So speaking of cash, Nebraska apparently has a lot of cash because they have now, you know, paid out Scott Frost among others. And so the hot topic in Iowa, one is the Iowa offense not being able to score, but two is
I've heard about that.
Yeah, two is Matt Campbell and the ongoing, is he going to stay at Iowa State? Are there other opportunities? But yet, interestingly now, Iowa State's 0-4 in the Big 12, have been competitive clearly and have been close to winning a lot of these games, just like we talked about. The rest of the Big 12 is just nuts right now. But has the quote-unquote luster worn off Matt Campbell nationally, where he's maybe not at the top of the list for jobs like Nebraska that he may have been even 4 weeks ago? Not saying he would even entertain the thought, but because he stayed at Iowa State, now the second longest tenured coach in the Big 12. But what's the Matt Campbell reputation nationally now?
So college football, I think, is maybe the most prisoner of the moment sport. Like, it is just one that everything radically changes. It's like Tennessee hasn't won in 15 years. Tennessee's going to the playoffs. And that sort of irrational emotion is a huge driver. So I'm looking at the Iowa State year by year. All right. And I see Matt Campbell, 8-5, 7-6, 9-3, 7-6. All right. I am looking for the previous 7-6, and that was 2009. I'm looking for the previous 8-win season, and that is Dan McCarney's mighty 2000 team, which I believe the quarterback was
this guy. Yeah.
So I just would say, like, Matt Campbell going cold would be great to, like, scream on television, but the reality is he's kept a cold place pretty hot. He has what you would call in coaching parlance defied gravity. He has taken a place. We can look this all up right now, actually.
Yeah, the Paul Rhodes era was pretty thin the last 3 or 4 years.
Yes.
And by the way, even though they're 3-4 right now, they're 0-4 in the Big 12. They've lost these 4 games by a score. What's interesting about Iowa State right now is that their defense is number 1 in the Big 12 conference. And their offense is last in the Big 12 conference. And you just don't see that very often. A lot of times if a team is last in the conference, you think they simply have worse players than everybody else. But their defense is number 1. So which means, like, well, it's not just like Texas has all the players and Oklahoma has all the players. Iowa State has players on both sides of the football. So they do have a massive strength. And the strength really, in my opinion, since Matt's been at Iowa State, has been that defense. I mean, John Haycock's defensive coordinator. Yeah. They started that 3-3-5 scheme, but like they stopped the run extremely well within that. And it was sort of invented to stop the spread because everyone's in shotgun and trying to throw the ball around an RPO. And now they got an extra guy out there. So naturally you think, hey, we can run the football versus these guys. But teams don't run it very well versus Iowa State, and they've done an incredible good job defensively, but their offense has really struggled, and their offense has been good, has had some good years, but they've had some really good players. I mean, David Montgomery, Chicago Bears running back, Breece Hall, of course, now with the Jets, playing great with the Jets, by the way, and Brock Purdy made the San Francisco 49ers team. So, I mean, obviously they've had some talent on offense, but right now that is their Achilles heel.
Do people in Iowa think Brock Purdy or Sage is the best quarterback in Iowa State history?
Oh, I'm sorry, Sage. Purdy's got you. He just does.
Listen, 2000, my senior year, I threw for 10 touchdowns.
And you and Sage, how many interceptions? How many interceptions?
Probably 10. Maybe 11. I ran for 10 touchdowns because we'd run quarterback draw at the 5-yard line, and I could just like lean over and score. We run some option, but yeah, I mean, that was back in the day where everything was under center. At least about 80% of the offense was. It was handoff to this running back, handoff to that running back, a little bootleg. It was actually much more what you consider pro style in a lot of ways than what you're seeing, now. Yeah. So yeah, I threw for 52%. Meanwhile, Brock Purdy was like 300-yard game, 300-yard game, 280, 350. I mean, the stats they would put up, that he put up were simply incredible. And I said, I think it was his sophomore year, I'm like, Brock Purdy's going to go down as the best quarterback in Iowa State history. And at least for the near future, he definitely has that title.
So on that point,
I'm going to give you my stat real quick on Matt Campbell here, because I just spent a lot of time looking it up, and I'm bad at math. So Matt Campbell's won 54% of his games as the Iowa State head coach. Iowa State's program has won generally, where is this here? I just had it, 45% of its games. So he has basically like out-achieved the historical mean by 10%, which is fairly significant. And if you look at the recent seasons, his amount of winning seasons are more than they had in the previous 20 years. So the level he's won at could only be duplicated if you had a dynamic 5-yard rusher named Sage Rosenfeld who could take that quarterback draw and dive over the goal line he didn't have a touchdown to interception ratio, had an interception to touchdown ratio.
That's right.
So you try to recapture that magic, and I think Matt Campbell has been able to do that.
It's not how many touchdowns
this year. That would be like preposterous. That would be like not hiring the best financial portfolio manager,
right?
Because like his one bad financial year in the last 8 was during a recession.
Yeah. Do you think that as a coach, whether it's Matt Campbell or guy at Kansas, do you think that this realignment situation has an effect on like, well, I don't want to be in the third conference. I'd like to be in that first 2 conferences. Are you seeing that from some of these coaches that are in either the Big 12 or the Pac-12 or the ACC going, I'm not seeing a big future in this conference. I'd like to be in either the Big 10 or the SEC. Are you seeing that?
I don't know how much coaches are considering that, but they should. Get to the right side of the moat where you're getting double the revenue. Like that's just going to make things easier. Now, the counter to that is, let's just say Rutgers getting $70 million a year is going to give them Penn State expectations, right? Probably not a high, but so everybody has a ton of money.
Yeah.
But the separation is real. So if you want to do everything you can, I would think that gets, that should factor. If you are a coach looking holistically at a place where you can go for 10 years, finances should absolutely be part of the equation. It's hard to fight, hundreds of millions of dollars in disparity financially over a 10-year period.
The interesting thing is, like we've seen with Nebraska and Missouri to an extent in the SEC, is in those big conferences, somebody still has to lose the games. And so I think, I guess from a Big 12 standpoint, I think there's a lot of optimism, even though the revenue will be less than the Big 10 and the SEC. But because it's been so even, as long as the Big 12 has a seat at the table and there's a chance to make a playoff, then de facto there is a chance to win a national championship, perhaps, and you can still be competitive even if the finances aren't there.
Absolutely. The argument for Colorado and Arizona State has been changed the other way by realignment. So you're telling me I could go here, the 5th, 6th job in the Pac-10 now, and I don't have to beat USC. I only have to beat Oregon and Washington. That's not bad, right? Like, and we're gonna get a bid. Like whoever wins this pillow fight gets a bid. Okay, like let's that will certainly weigh in too. But I just think longevity. If you really want to build it and compete for a national title, you're going to need the more resources, because what's going to happen is you're going to get hot at Arizona State, and Nebraska is going to double your linebacker coach's salary, and you're not going to be able to afford to keep him. Like you're just going to end up in a hamster wheel at some point.
But wouldn't you think? Let's say it ends up being the 12 teams in the playoffs, and 3 of those teams are from the SEC, and 4 of those teams are from the Big Ten, and the Big 12 might get 2, and the Pac-12 might get 1 or 2, or however it sort of breaks down. Sort of funnels on. You got to imagine of the 12 teams, SEC and the Big Ten will have more than ACC, Big 12, Pac-12. But to go into the SEC and to try to get through that conference seems to be a lot harder than going into the Big 12 and to try to get through that conference.
Well, do you want to finish 5th in the SEC and get a bid, or 4th in the SEC and get a bid, or do you want to finish 1st in one of the other leagues? That's the math you have to game out. Gotcha.
Well, I know Pete's got to run, Sage, so we do have to.
I do have a couple questions. It's not even football related. It's Boston related.
And we need to ask him about the Ames water too, because he says he's been to every Power 5 school except Washington State, which means he has tasted the sweet water of Ames and Iowa City to a lesser extent.
Is the best bit we had on my old podcast at Yahoo, which is still going, and it's a great podcast. The Yahoo College Sports Podcast with what's now called the College Football Inquirer. So with Dan Wetzel and Pat Forty. Dan Wetzel is hilarious. Like, he's legitimately really funny. And there was this like spoof song about Ames. It was like a move to Ames and you have to play this when you read.
We will.
Yeah.
Yes.
I've seen it.
It is like pee your pants funny. And so when Iowa State that offseason, when they were like hot and everyone was talking about 2 years ago, we would just play it over and over again. And then people started like driving to Ames just to sample the water and like taking pictures and putting it on Twitter. When Iowa State played Ohio to open the year, one of the Ohio assistants sent me a text of like the water, like the Marriott table and like the team room where we have team dinner. And he was like, the sweet, sweet Ames water. And I was like, oh gosh. This is a thing. He said, I wish the result of the game was as sweet as this Ames tap. So anyway, I have no idea if the water at Ames is any good. I was there so long ago that I had not been told by the docile tones of that City of Ames song about how good it was. But we've gotten a lot of mileage out of that joke. I do know in the Iowa State football offices where that podcast was listened to, that there was quite an appreciation for our consistent odes to Ames water. But then they actually had some water tests. It became controversial.
Yeah, I remember that a couple years ago.
It's really been like a thing. Like, it's really gone through, it's gone through like the quintessential American rise and fall scandal comeback. The Ames water has really been an enduring character in college football for a long period of time. But all jokes aside, I have a ton of respect for Ames. I have a ton of respect for Iowa State. That's, like I said earlier, what makes the sport great is the spirit of a place like that. Spirit of basketball, football. Like what a great little heartbeat. And when they can rise up and swing with the big boys, it was really cool to see them finally kind of beat Iowa this year. That's kind of what makes the sport fun, is like the water cooler stuff and the split families and just that sort of raw passion, all distilled in some sweet Ames tap.
Last thing for me, Pete, and then what's the impression nationally on Iowa? Because Kirk Ferentz has been there forever. They're clearly last in offense. It's kind of a running joke now, even just on Twitter and from some of the national college football people, of the ineptitude of the Iowa offense. What's the impression of what they've done? They still won 10 games last year, though, so you can't say they haven't been successful, but yet here you are, and it's been a struggle to even get to 10 points.
I mean, they're not last in the Big Ten. They're last in the country.
The whole country right now
in offense.
Yes. So I would imagine there's going to be some changes there, right? Like, because you can't continue to do that. This is what I would say from 20 years of doing this. Like, be careful what you wish for if you want Kirk Ferentz to go there, because that guy has outkicked his coverage, right? Like, that guy the sum has been greater than the parts many, many years there. They have a very distinct identity, a very distinct style. Don't underestimate how much high school coaches trust Kirk Ferentz to send their players there to develop and get better. The NFL really values Kirk Ferentz, not just Bill Belichick, but a lot of places. They play on Saturdays like they play on Sundays. So certainly they've struggled, and certainly it's been hard to watch. Nobody is going to say that. But all of a sudden, if somebody in Iowa decides that they want to make a change there, you try beating what Kirk Ferentz has done there. I would put down a hefty bet that the successor does not meet or match what Kirk has done. So it's hard to win at Iowa, considering there's only so many Sage Rosenfels growing up in a VW bus, next to a river somewhere. So there is only so much natural resources there. I feel like Kirk Ferentz has maximized it about as much as you can. Now, are there going to be changes? Yes. Will there be adjustments? Should they probably have shaken up that quarterback room a little bit, this past offseason? That obviously in hindsight seems like it's something that should have been done. But,
well, they're in a really sticky situation because Kirk's son, Brian, is the offensive coordinator, and literally the definition of nepotism in football, whether it's the NFL or college football, is simply incredible. So that turns it into an awkward situation because it's hard to fire your son, who many thought was going to be the next head coach at Iowa. And I'm sort of thinking that part of the reason they're struggling this year is that the Iowa City water simply isn't very good. My parents live in Iowa City, and honestly, it ain't great over there. Sort of smells like a river. But anyway, my last question is this: you're a Boston guy, South Boston guy. The Departed or Good Will Hunting? If you had to choose,
definitely Good Will Hunting. Like, just not even close. Not even close. Yeah, in so many ways. That final scene where they're playing Afternoon Delight as he's driving down the Mass Pike. Oof, that's good. Like, I lived right in South Boston. I've lived here for 15 years. Ian Rappaport was a regular at the L Street Tavern when he lived in South Boston, when he covered the Patriots for the Boston Herald about 10 years ago. He and his wife Leah lived right down the street, and that's the bar where Minnie Driver tells the joke where she spits out the Guinness.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and that's where they meet him after to give him that orange car so he can go see about a girl. It's a great question, but it is a definitive answer. It may surprise you that I'm not a huge pop culture guy, but I like Good Will Hunting so much. I saw it. It came out my senior year in college. I saw it on a Friday night, and I went back on Saturday and watched it again.
I watched that in college at some Ames small theater as well. And one of my favorite movies of all time, How Do You Like Them Apples, is simply incredible. It really is when you're a college kid. I feel like when you're in high school, you want to be in college. When you're in middle school, you want to be in high school, right? Yeah. So obviously these guys were like just out of college or just out of high school, basically. Yeah. So you're sort of like could really relate to a young Matt Damon and Ben Affleck, before he met up with J-Lo, and then the world changed forever. I'm more of a Good Will Hunting guy. I like The Departed, but Good Will Hunting to me is it's probably a top 2 or 3 movie for me. Sports movie, before we go, favorite sports movie of all time. I mean, you got to I know it's hard to make sports movies, but for me, it's Hoosiers. I think Hoosiers is my favorite sports movie. Do you have a favorite sports movie?
I would say Hoosiers/Rudy.
Rudy.
Okay.
Yeah, Rudy's good.
You like the cheesy sort of, Let's do it.
And with that, we will let Pete Thamel get back to that lovely South Boston water. Pete, if you're ever in central Iowa, back in Iowa, Sage will host you for a tap water. I will as well, and a Busch Light. It's on us, my friend.
That sounds divine. That sounds absolutely divine.
Well, I don't
Thanks
think
so much for having me, guys. This is a lot of fun. Really appreciate you guys thinking about me and taking some time to take a sip of that sweet Ames tap.
That's right.
Yeah, I don't think you're going to be in Ames for this football season, but maybe our basketball team turns it around and we're a top 10 team and you have to come to Ames. For an Ames, Kansas showdown, Iowa State, Kansas showdown, I'll meet you there. I'll get you a ticket. Well, you'll get the media. You get the media thing going on. You'll be right there on the floor. So.
We can have a few Busch Lights before. Maybe I'll
That's
just
right.
go sit in the stand.
We can,
Love
and I can complain about something. All right. Thanks, Pete.
Thank you, Pete.
For coming on.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.